Hi there, this is Rich Trox. I've always believed that when it comes to fishing from the surf, finding new spots and figuring out how to catch fish from them is what fishing's really all about. It's also where the real fun is. And now that I've recently moved to the Virginia Beach area, I get to experience that fun all over again as I go through the process of learning my new territory and what makes it tick. As a longtime surf fisherman and self-confessed spot junkie, I can honestly tell you that you can never have enough spots to fish. Spots are options, and the more options you have, the more likely you are to catch fish. Spots can be big, and spots can be small, and most of them will be seasonal and/or conditions dependent, meaning they won't produce steadily throughout the year. I'm always amazed at how many times I see fishermen walk to the water's edge, spike a rod, and then sit and wait for something to happen. This is the worst thing you can do. Fish, particularly predatory fish, don't do random. They don't just swim around looking for something to commit suicide on. Actually, it's quite the opposite. Most of their life is spent in a very deliberate manner, with the focus of their activities being centered on making sure they have enough to eat without expending too much energy in the process. This is why spots are so important. Every good spot will have one or more pieces of structure associated with it, and it is structure combined with a viable bait source that will hold fish consistently. When looking at new areas, I always prefer the last stages of the outgoing tide. I want moving water so that the structure reveals itself, but I also want the water low enough to reveal bottom contours that might not otherwise be visible at the higher stages of the tide. This is the first of a series of videos that I will be doing on finding your own spots and learning to fish them. This is my first ever look at Lynnhaven Inlet, so let's get started and see what she has to offer. This is the west side of Lynnhaven Inlet. There's a small beach just off the parking area that you walk under the bridge to get to. It's open day or night, at least that is what I believe. Some very nice structure in close within easy casting distance. I'll take a closer look at that in a second. And this is a slow panorama. The tide is currently outgoing. That is the bridge. It is lighted and has a walkway. So it's always a good idea to go up at night and see what's in the shadow line. I've moved closer to shore to get a better view of the rip. Although the perspective of the camera makes it look like it's quite a ways out, it's actually quite close to shore. There's a good view of it right there. You can see it just below the hotels that are in the background. And it's quite close to shore. And very good looking rip. That would be one of the first places I would look at. Okay, I've moved a little closer to the bridge to get a better look at the rip. This is actually where I would probably stand if I was fishing this, or at least initially. And because it's a little bit overcast, it was hard to see the rip from where I was standing before, but this gives you a better view of it. Again, it's very close into shore within easy casting reach of a bucktail or a plug. And as you can see, it really dumps into a nice hole. You can see the darker water up at the top. The beach itself was fairly clear water, had fairly clear water on it, so you could see the sandbar going out to it, and you can clearly see that there's a hole there. That water rushes out from underneath the bridge and hits that kind of horseshoe-shaped depression and forms that nice rip. So that is classic bass structure right there, and that's the type of stuff you want to look for when you're looking around fast-moving water. Okay, I've now moved to the south side of the bridge, the back side, the uptide side, whatever you want to call it. As you can see, there's a big power line pole there, which would create a problem if I was looking to try to cast and fish the shadow line at night. I could probably drop it in between there. It's in a cove anyway. If you look further down the beach, you can see at that point there that the channel comes right up against that point and then goes straight out across the bridge. So this is kind of a dead water area that doesn't really have a whole lot of current. All right, I'm a little further south down the beach. It gives you a different perspective of where that pole is. The pole is actually quite close to shore. If I'm standing down by the shoreline, I can easily reach those other pilings to the right of that pole. So this is a very viable place to fish at night, to fish the shadow line that's coming down from the lights on the bridge, particularly on an outgoing tide. This is where you would want to be. And again, the camera tends to make everything look further away, but it is actually close enough to reach with a cast. So that whole area there is certainly viable. The current picks up as you move toward the center of the bridge, so there's enough current there to hold some fish. And of course, anytime you can fish a shadow line, you should. At this point, I've walked down to the water's edge from where I was standing, and it's my first real look at the backside water's edge. And what I found was that there's no gradually sloping shoreline here. It goes out about 3 feet and then drops straight down as if it was dredged, which I suspect it was, because further down there are some machinery and some barges and stuff that they look like they took sand out of here. Anyway, now that the camera has panned up, you can see that that's the rip that forms along the edge of the main channel. The channel comes around the point that you'll see in my next series of shots. But the rip line is clearly visible, and it's within easy casting distance. It would be the type of thing that I would throw a bucktail at, bottle plug, maybe a needlefish, depending upon what the prevailing bait is at the time. But I would certainly throw a bucktail. I would focus on that whole area with a bucktail. I have no idea how deep the water is, so the first thing I would do is come down and with a couple of 4 or 5 ounce sinkers, and I would just throw them around until I know exactly how deep all the water is in the area. I mean, that's really important to being able to pick your baits properly. But that's the rip that forms there, and it's in plain view. All right, this is the point I referenced in my previous clip. It's actually the inside edge of the channel that runs right along that shoreline, and I mean right up against the shoreline. And as the water is pushed out, it's obviously made some bottom structure, which is giving itself away by the rips that you see on the surface. You can see a little ways out, it looks like there's a piece of bottom structure that's making that water run over the top of it. And then, of course, further back, you can see that straight line rip, which is actually the far edge of the channel as it goes towards the bridge. Now, all of that is within casting distance from shore a little further down, and the stuff that's on this side of the channel is easy from where it is right now, although I wouldn't fish it exactly from there. I would go down further. Anyway, there's a whole lot going on because that channel comes right up along there, and it's created 3 events that I would look at immediately. That rip line that's close, the far rip line, and this, which is a hole which actually has a back eddy forming on it. And you'll see in a second there's a piece of seaweed running backwards up against the current. I happen to like these events. Bass have a tendency, when they're not feeding, to pull off into places like this to get out of the current. So this might be the type of place that I would throw a bunker chunk for a while on a nice calm night when nobody's around to see what's in there. So this is a very interesting area right here. A lot going on. So this is the view from the point, which is the inside of the channel. As you can see, the channel is very narrow. The red and green buoys are within easy casting distance. The water has, the current has pushed a sort of a submerged point underneath the actual point. You can see the sand there. Water moves pretty stiff around here. And in the background, you can see the 2 rips, the one that's perpendicular to the channel, which would be the one that would interest me the most, and then the far one, the very straight one that you see in the back, which is the channel edge, the far channel edge. So again, there's a whole lot going on there. This is not too far from where I would fish it. I would fish it a little bit more to the left and sort of walk over that protrusion. So this channel runs all along the shoreline down there, and this point is actually on a little neck of land that has a little cove behind it that you'll see in a second, along with the dredging equipment that I had referenced earlier. So I'm sure that there had been some sand dredging here at one time. This is a little further south down along the channel, approaching the barges and the dredging equipment. And I couldn't help noticing that there was a rip on the side of the barge there. And while I don't advocate doing things that are against the law or things that you're not supposed to, I also believe that anything that makes water flow around it, over it, under it, should be looked at. So I would leave that up to you, but me, I would be out on it. Apparently they've been moving a lot of sand here, and as you'll see, channel allows them to push this barge right up against the shore. So, I mean, it's literally right out in front of your face, so it would be very easy to get on. And makes a convenient fishing platform, so it always pays to look. This is a section of channel that is just behind the barge, or more accurately, just south of the barge. The channel runs directly due south. I'm not sure what happened to that green buoy, but it's not marking the far edge of the channel right now. And as the camera pans down, you can see it's a relatively straight shoreline. You can see the next set of buoys down there. It runs all the way down to the point near as far as you can go there. And then there's a little channel that cuts into the right, and on the other side is Pleasure House Point or Pleasure House Preserve. Now, what's important to note about this whole thing is that the far edge of the channel is within easy casting distance from this side of the shore. So that's your primary structure right there. You can cast things up on that sandbar and pull them off the channel edge. Bass will, and most fish, will follow an edge like a shadow. And the other thing is, because the channel is so long and straight, you walk the length of it and you look for any kind of rip or ripple on the surface that would indicate that there's an irregularity on the bottom. All you need is no more than a foot difference, a little hole of a foot, maybe 2 feet, and that will always hold fish. So those are the kind of things you look for under these conditions. So we're a little further south on the channel now, and you could clearly see a sandbar sticking up on the other side of the channel there. And you'll also notice there's a very subtle little rip that's sort of right out in front there. There's a little calm section of water with sort of a U-shaped rough water around it, slightly darker in color also. That would indicate that there's probably something going on in the bottom. It may only be a little bit of a bump, but anything like that should always be looked at and checked out. You know, bounce a bucktail over it and see what's there. This was as far south as I was able to walk. The Terminus is a channel that branches up into the right. It goes up to the condominiums and the houses and the boat launch ramp that's up there. It's obviously man-made. It's a man-made channel. The channel edge is right up next to the shore. It's even marked by that little white pole. It's not very wide. You could cast across it very easily. Doesn't have much current coming out of it. So in and of itself, it's not a highly structured place to fish. It would probably be good for specks, and and bunker might want to get up in there because it's not quite as active. But as you can see, it's just a narrow channel, goes all the way back up there. But the important thing is that it comes in at a right angle to the main channel. The main channel has very fast water running past it. So this is an interface of calm water and fast water with a point on either side. Points are always important places to check out. You should work them very hard. Many times there's submerged structure related to it that holds fish. And like I said, the interface of calm water and moving water in and of itself is structure. So these places should always be looked at. So this is as far south as I can get. There is a fairly high bluff that runs along the channel as you get down south, of which I'm standing on top of now. Gives you a very nice aerial view. You can see the channel that branched off to the right that we were just down at. And it gives you a nice view of the size of the channel. Now right now the tide is completely bottomed out, so there's no current, but still it gives you a good idea of what you're looking at. That boat you could almost reach out if you were on the shore and touch. The camera, again, does not do distances justice. It does give you a good view of the far channel edge, which is really your primary structure along this whole thing. You could never go wrong by lobbing a needlefish up there on an incoming or outgoing tide and letting it just swim over the edge of that. Bass and fish in general love edges. Cannot stress this enough. They will follow an edge like a shadow. They'll stay right on it. So that's your primary structure there. One thing I did note was there looks like there's a little unofficial 4x4 road there. I think I'll check out where the access is. Might be useful. So let's summarize what we saw today by starting up at the north side of the bridge and working southward. The bayside beach has a U-shaped hole in the channel which produces a very nice rip on the outgoing tide. It is within easy casting distance, and the apparent depth would make it a good candidate for plugs like darters, bottle plugs, bombers, and needlefish, as well as the always useful bucktail. The bridge itself has lights on it, so this makes it primarily a night op. Before fishing either side from shore, I would first go up and take a look at what is in the shadow line. The north side of the bridge would basically be fished on the incoming, with the current flowing into it, by bouncing bucktails into the shadow line. The slant of the shoreline makes it difficult to fish this side because you can't get far enough up the shore from the shadow line to work it properly. Conversely, the slanted shoreline on the south side of the bridge makes it ideal for fishing the shadow line at night. This would be on the outgoing tide with the current moving into the bridge. The slanted shoreline puts you out in front of the bridge, allowing for nice long sweeps of the bucktail across the shadow line. This area will get a lot of play from me on my initial night forays. The point just south of the bridge has three obvious features associated with it. The first is the rip on the far channel edge, which is well within casting range. This is caused by water coming off the massive flats on the far side of the bay on the dropping tide. The second feature really caught my interest and is the rip that runs roughly perpendicular to the channel. This is caused by a change in bottom contour, most likely a sand hump formed by the current pushing around the point. The third is the hole and back eddy that spins off the main channel. These are like bass rest areas and are great places to throw a chunk into. The rest of the channel running south is fairly straight and narrow, and the far side is reachable with a cast. The primary structure along the entire length is the far channel edge, which should be fished on the outgoing tide as the water comes off the flats and washes into the channel. I'll repeat myself again by stating that most fish love edges and changes in bottom contour, so they stick to them like glue. There may actually be some isolated perpendicular bottom structures at various places along the main channel, but by the time I got down there, the current had died so much I couldn't really read the bottom very well. The walkable shore ends at the little boat channel that cuts in from the right of the main channel. The tide was shot at this point, so you can't see the interface of where these two channels meet. Suffice it to say that there is usually a lot going on spots like these, both current-wise and bottom structure-wise. The short version is that I would fish the north point, the one I'm standing on the incoming, allowing the tide to swing the plug out of the main channel and into the water interface by the far point. The opposite would hold true if I were fishing the far point. So that's it for now. The next step is to come down and work each of these spots over and log the results. Over time, bites and patterns will emerge, and this is what leads to consistent catches. I hope this look at how I approach a new area helps you in finding your own spots. My version of life is that catching fish is fun, but catching fish from spots you figure out on your own is twice the fun. That's my view from the beach. Till next time, be well and catch 'em up.